So, how y'all doing? We are coming to the very end of the semester. The days are getting dark. You're at the end of your energy, presumably. Hopefully you're doing okay. Same thing's happening to me, so this is why I haven't posted quiz 3 yet. I'm sorry about that. I keep telling you that I'm going to post it any day now. The longer it goes without me posting it, the more likely an extremely trivial quiz is. I might do like 2 questions that you definitely know the answer to. That's becoming a very real possibility. If I don't do it by tonight, that's what you're going to get. It is going to be the easiest quiz you've ever done. So yeah. So my apologies about that. I know it's even with that as the resolution, the uncertainty is unsettling. So I'm sorry I haven't been on top of that. The marks for almost all of the argument analyses are now up, and your feedback should be up. So to access that, you go back to uTor submit where you submitted it, and there should be a file you can download with some comments in it. There is about 10, I think, late submissions that we haven't finished yet, but those should happen quite soon. And the marks for test 2. I'm sorry I don't have test 2 back for you yet. I just haven't collected half of the pile from one of the TAs. So I'll have those to hand back to you in class on Tuesday. Yeah? The arguments for the second argument analysis are up. So take a look at them. And the instructions are exactly the same as the first argument analysis. Exactly the same. Just do the exact same thing, incorporating whatever feedback you got, and that'll be that. The average from the first argument analysis so far is like 77, which is awesome. I'm very glad to see that. That means that you as a collective did very, very well in this. So, okay. Any course mechanics questions? Stuff about how we're doing? Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to say something in class on Tuesday, which was to communicate my apologies and apologies from basically everyone up and down the hierarchy of control for making you sit on bleachers in class last week. There was definitely supposed to be chairs in that gymnasium. So if you weren't there, there was a projector and a screen on one side of the gymnasium and nothing else in the room. So you guys put up with that very well. I heard no complaints about it, which is great. I would like to apologize. The caretaking staff would like to apologize. The head of Department of Philosophy would like to apologize to you all for the inconvenience. So thanks for putting up with that. Okay. I think that's it. Okay. So today we're just going to continue on the stuff that we were talking about on Tuesday, which was cognition and mental health. We're going to get a little more specific about the kind of things that you can do to deal with specific kinds of cognitive distortions. I do think it's worth mentioning right off the bat, however, these people, the Wellness Center at UTM, so the Health and Counseling Center in the Davis building, you have access to free counseling. Counseling can run up to like $100 or $200 an hour outside of the context of being in a university. Currently, you have access to free counseling. So it's a good deal. You should try it. If you're not currently teetering on the edge of a breakdown, now is an excellent time to try it. That's the best time because you have this kind of mental space and energy to cope with the process. Don't leave it until you're just absolutely flipping out. Do it before then. And I would propose that it's helpful for the reasons that we've been talking about, sort of the idea that you can get a little bit of distance from your own thoughts, you can get a little bit of space, and if you have somebody who's trained to listen to you in a non-judgmental way, it's really, really helpful. So just throw that out there. You have access to hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of free counseling, and it can make you like happier or at least more stable or something like that. Okay, so there's that. Right, so we're going to continue talking today about cognition and mental health, and the main idea we're going to talk about is cognitive restructuring. So this is a family of techniques usually taught in the context of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the sort of like big famous modalities of therapy right now. It's one of the kinds of therapies that has the best empirical evidence behind it, so there's been a lot of studies on this stuff. It's shown to be about as effective as medication, and the combination of medication and CBT has shown to be more effective than either one of them in isolation. The basic idea of cognitive restructuring is to take either an emotionally charged thought or kind of a pattern of thought, repetitive thoughts, and do a little bit of argument analysis on it, which is why I thought it was relevant for this class. There's a whole world of things that you can do to intervene on your own mental health. Not all therapy is anything like this. This is just the bits of it that are kind of like most like critical reasoning. So really it's just, identify that you're having a thought that might be maladaptive, that might be unhelpful, analyze it critically analyze it the way you critically analyze arguments in this class, and then check back in with yourself and see, okay, now that I've kind of gone through it, how do I feel now? But we can get more specific than that in this class. So just a heads up before we start this though, I think it's important to think about what the goal of this kind of practice is. So I would propose to you that it's unhelpful. So I just want to warn you quickly about something that you might take away from this. It's important to not define mental health in terms of never feeling bad or sad or angry or mad or any of those things, right? So the goal of this is not to eliminate all negative emotions from your life. I think that's a really dangerous thing to have. And if you're many of you are very ambitious people who hold themselves to extremely high standards. That's one of the things that's sort of like characteristic of U of T students. This is not the school that you go to like have fun and party. This is the school where you go to like work incredibly hard, typically speaking. Maybe a little bit of both, but like certainly people who come here tend to want to do very well at their tasks. So the danger of this stuff, I'm going to sort of talk about various techniques that you can use to intervene on your own mental processes. The danger is to start feeling like you're not doing a good enough job at that task, so that anytime that you feel bad or anytime that you're having a negative emotion, you feel like, oh, I'm not good enough at cognitive restructuring. I'm a failure at manipulating my own mind. I think that's a maladaptive way of processing this, but it's the kind of thing that an ambitious and like somebody who holds themselves to high standards might do to themselves. So by way of analogy, just to explain why that might be, consider the function of pain. Like you might think it would be really nice to not feel physical pain, right? Wouldn't that be nice to never feel physical pain? Well, about 1 in a million people are born with congenital insensitivity to pain. They don't feel pain. So when something like burns them or smacks them or something like that, they feel pressure, but they don't get the pain response. Heaven, right? Well, actually, those people live kind of miserable lives. They have to take extreme measures to protect themselves consciously, because if they just sort of go spontaneously about the day, they break limbs, they get cuts and burns. Like the pain that you feel, the physical pain that you feel, plays a really important regulative role in your behavior, right? It keeps you from hurting yourself. And people with congenital insensitivity to pain typically have dozens of broken bones in their life. They've got like all kinds of injuries, and they don't, because they don't process pain as a signal to like take care of yourself and don't go beyond your limits, they often don't get treated for that stuff, like unless they've built up a really elaborate plan for themselves that would take the place that pain is supposed to take in your life. So I would suggest to you that you do not want to be free of physical pain. You don't want to have no physical pain in your life, because pain is an important regulatory signal. Yeah? But on the other hand, of course, there are people who have chronic pain disorders. So I know somebody who has, I think it's called neuralgia. They just have constant face pain, or like for days at a time, their face will just hurt really, really bad for no reason. And that's pain also no longer playing its regulatory role, right? That pain does not signify that she needs to do anything different in her life other than to go to the doctor and try to get her neuralgia treated, right? So, what was supposed to be a regulatory signal, like the healthy function of pain, has gone off the rails, and now she's just feeling unhelpful pain all the time. It's very distracting and draining, like it's a serious problem. So healthy pain is pain that helps us guide us towards better behaviors, like that makes you take care of yourself, that makes you know your limits, that kind of thing. So your goal shouldn't be, in physical terms, to feel no pain ever in your life, right? Your goal should be to feel appropriate pain, to feel the right kind of pain at the right time, and to be able to pay attention to it and react to it behaviorally. Okay, so this is all an elaborate metaphor, which I'm sure you get the point of. Sorry. that your mental life, your goal in your mental life should not be to never feel distress. It should not be to never be upset or hurt or scared or angry. Those are all adaptive signals. Those are all regulatory signals to you that you've got something that you need to deal with. So feeling sad, if somebody close to you has died or something terrible has happened in your life, feeling sad in those circumstances is not a depressive disorder. That's depression. That's like a healthy response. Like a healthy response to something terrible happened is to feel bad. So whatever you do with this stuff, I don't want you to try to trick yourself out of feeling healthy pain, right? Similarly, healthy anxiety, like if some big stressful thing is coming up on you, it's perfectly adaptive and perfectly healthy to feel a bit nervous about it, right? That's your body mobilizing energy and resources towards the task that you're about to engage in. So having some anxiety, having some depression, having some anger, having some sadness are perfectly healthy responses. It's when those signals stop being adaptive. So when you have a mental health disorder, when you have an anxiety disorder, that's when you're feeling anxiety way out of proportion to what would be regulatory for you. Or if you have a depressive disorder, you're feeling sadness and loneliness and all that stuff way out of proportion to what would help you actually guide your actions. Yeah? So if there's any point in using these techniques, it's to make sure that you're not having an anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder. It's not to eliminate any sense of badness or sadness from your life, because there's going to be some of that, right? There's going to be some unpleasantness in your life, especially if it's an interesting and fulfilling one. Yeah? Like, if you live an interesting and fulfilling life where you get to engage in all kinds of great creative projects and bold new adventures, that means there's going to be a bunch of failure and upset and frustration. Guaranteed. Nobody has ever done any of those things and just always succeeded. So the goal can't be to never feel bad. The goal should be to feel bad in the appropriate proportions and in ways that you can handle, kind of thing. Okay? So just by way of warning. So on to the basic cognitive restructuring idea. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, they've got this sort of theoretical framework. Take this with a grain of salt, like any theoretical framework that tries to deal with the most complex objects that we're aware of, which is us. But they have this view that people have core beliefs about themselves and their world. These aren't explicit beliefs. They are kind of like background frameworks that structure everything that you think and feel, right? So you don't usually have these as accessible, explicit beliefs. You have these as the background framework. So, for example, do you fundamentally believe that your world is safe or fundamentally believe that it's dangerous? Either one of those would be a core belief. So I believe my world is dangerous. I believe my world is safe. Do you believe it's reliable? Do you expect that, that things will happen according to in an orderly fashion? Or do you believe that everything is going to constantly be upset in your life? So those are beliefs about your world. You can also have core beliefs about yourself, like I am a worthless person is a core belief that a lot of people carry around. Or I am a person with worth, another core belief that a lot of people carry around. Or I'm the best. I'm just so awesome you can't believe it. Some people hold that as a core belief. That's also kind of maladaptive, I would point out. Like you can go too far in either direction here of thinking that, like if you believe fundamentally that your world is ultra stable and then something unexpected happens, that can be very challenging for you. Or if you believe fundamentally that you're the best and then somebody says no to you or you fail at some minor thing, it can be very hard to integrate, right? So if you had to pick between being too positive and being too negative, like if you got to pick, you don't, but if you got to pick, I would recommend the too positive side. I think that's, I tend towards the like thinking that I'm great side of things. It's easier to deal with that than the ultra negative core belief, but nonetheless, neither one is perfect. So also core beliefs about how much control you have. Like, do you believe that you are in the driver's seat of your life, or do you believe that you're being blown around by indifferent forces, right? And the locus of control. Is it your job to solve all of your life's problems? Like, is all of the responsibility for the conditions of your life on you, or is it on the people around you as well? And again, in either direction, you can go to a maladaptive place where you're either like permanently in, I need help, I can't do anything, or permanently in, this is all my job and I cannot accept help because it's my job, okay? So these are kind of core beliefs that you implicitly have. On each of these, you have some belief probably, according to the CVT model. And if you have an extreme core belief, it can produce what they call cognitive distortions, right? So you can think about this in terms of confirmation bias, right? Remember confirmation bias, where you pay a lot more attention and you think evidence is much more important if it confirms your belief than disconfirms your belief. So if you have a core belief that you're a worthless person, evidence to that effect will jump out at you vividly, brightly, multicolors, right? It'll occupy a lot of your attention and a lot of your focus. And evidence to the contrary will be brushed aside. You'll kind of say, well, you know, yeah, I did well on that, but that's not really that important, yeah? So that's a kind of cognitive distortion, a distortion in your ability to accurately represent reality. And we're going to talk today about a few techniques that you can use to kind of push back against these. So it's really hard to change one of your core beliefs. They're highly resistant, according to this model, they're highly resistant to evidence that should change your degree of belief in that kind of like core framework, right? A lot of this stuff gets set up in childhood, the thought goes. So if you were, as a kid, somebody told you over and over again that nothing that you do is good enough and that you're a garbage person, that's going to stick with you. You know, and your surface level belief that that's false is probably not going to overturn that core belief in any kind of quick and easy way. But you can push back. That's the point of this. You can push back against the kind of distortions that the core belief produces, and you can shape your life so that you slowly chip away at it, and that you can resist the negative effects of a maladaptive core belief. Yeah? Okay. So here are some cognitive distortions. We're going to look at these 5 today. Attribution errors, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, hedonic adaptation, and excessive self-focus. So we'll get to these. We'll talk about each one in detail. But before we do that, so the approach that CVT recommends is to challenge these distortions with what's called cognitive restructuring. The first step of that is to identify the distortion. To do that, though, you need to be able to separate facts from your interpretations of these facts. So I recommend, the sheets that I gave you today, there's one side is thoughts are not facts, and the other side is thought record. I don't think we're going to do the thought record in class today. I just wanted to put this in your hands. We'll talk about it, but we won't make you do it. But right now, do the other side. Do the thoughts are not facts one. And you tick off whether something is a thought or an opinion. Go through that list and decide whether you think something is a thought or opinion, and then we'll talk about them. Just it should be quick. I hate the fact-opinion dichotomy, by the way, because your opinions can also be facts, right? I'm of the opinion that 2 + 2 = 4. Well, that's also a fact. But anyway, so facts and interpretations I like better, but this is the way they put it. So do this, take a couple minutes and do this, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Let's, this is not I don't think this is a very serious exercise, but worth showing it to you anyway. Let's go through them. So what do you think? What do you think of each of these? Do you think that each of these are facts or opinions? So I am a bad person, fact or opinion? Opinion. They definitely want you to say opinion. I don't know, maybe there are objectively bad people in the world, but it's definitely, okay, so let's actually, you know what, let's back this up and say, is this a fact or an interpretation? So I'm a bad person. That's an interpretation, right? So you've interpreted the facts in some way or other. Good. Sam told me that she didn't like what I said about her. Fact or interpretation? That's a fact, right? The fact is that that person said that. That's not something that you like have to dig through reality and figure out what's relevant. They just either said it or didn't. Nothing ever goes right. Probably an opinion. Actually, so it's a factual statement though, isn't it? It's supposed to be, like, if you can go through every single thing that you've ever done in your life and found that they all went wrong, then that's a fact. It's probably just not the case. Like, unless you lived an incredibly, like, unlikely life, that's your interpretation of the situation, not a fact. Yeah?
What does it mean for everything to go wrong?
Yeah, okay, good. So what does wrong mean? Good, good. Like, okay, so I once had a student come up to me distressed and wondering, what should I do? I bombed the test. And I knew her, I thought, no, you got a B+. That's not bombing the test. So for her, that was something that had gone really wrong. She was upset, she was distressed. It had gone wrong for her. But kind of because of her interpretation, I think most people, you should regard a B+ as doing very well. Like the university tells me that if I deem your work to be excellent, you get an A-, and a B+ is like on the very verge of excellence. So I don't know. This will be a disaster. Probably an opinion. I think they want you to say opinion. Oh, there's answers. Oh wait, there's answers right here. Oh good, okay, so, yeah, on the upside down side, there's answers. So, but that doesn't mean they're right. I mean, just because they said it doesn't mean they're right. So 5, I'm not as attractive as they are. They think that's an opinion. Fair enough. Attractiveness is certainly in the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Lots of people find lots of different things attractive. 6, I failed the test. Well, was that? Good, yeah, so it depends on what you mean by failure. So my student who thought B+ was bombing the test considered themselves a failure, but that was an interpretation rather than a fact. I think if you take fail to be like below 50% like we do at U of T, then there's a fact of the matter about whether you failed or not. Yeah? Yeah? Say the same, okay, good. Oh.
Bombing is more relative because like,
okay.
it depends on the result. But
Yeah.
Objectively see if someone's failed or not.
Yeah, yeah. I think so if we take fail to be like getting less than 50%, there's a number on it and you either failed or you didn't. Okay. I am overweight. Well, they put that as a fact.
Is it not opinion? If you're anorexic, then
Yeah, so I disagree with their answer on this. I think this was very much an opinion. I can tell you that I don't often go to the gym, but before I go to the gym, I feel tubby and soft, and after I feel ripped. There's no difference in my body from one moment to the other. So I feel overweight before, and like 3 hours later, I feel fine. I don't feel awesome about my body, but I'm like, hey, that's all right. I do okay. Yeah. So I would say they're wrong about this one. He shouted at me. That's probably a fact, right? Like, if you can define shouting, sometimes my wife tells me that I'm yelling at her, but I just sort of like have a mean look on my face and I'm talking sternly. So it could be interpretation. Yeah. There's something wrong with me. That's true. Yes, it's just a fact that there's at least one thing wrong with any of you, unless one of you are secretly God. I always throw that out in my classes just in case God's auditing one of my classes. But yeah, no. So probably there's something wrong with all of us. I skipped I'm selfish, which is an opinion, apparently. I'm lazy. Opinion. It could be a fact. I don't even know what lazy means. To tell you the truth, I have no idea what it means to be lazy. I don't know anybody who doesn't use up the resources that they have. Everybody wants to do stuff. Nobody wants to be like, I just want to like, and if you don't have the motivation to do anything, that's a resources that you lack, right? So I don't even know what counts as lazy. Like I don't know anybody who's like, I could totally, like achieve my goals, but I'm not gonna. I don't know anybody like that. All right, I didn't lend my friend money when they asked. That's a fact, right? You either did this thing or you didn't. I didn't lend my friend money when they asked, therefore I'm garbage. Now we're interpreting. Okay, my feet are too big. That's an opinion.
unless you have to fit your foot somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you go past about size 12 as a man, you have to start buying your shoes off the internet. That's like too big. That's too big. All right. I'm ugly. They're certainly going to put that under opinion. And no one will ever love me, certainly under opinion. Okay. All right. So there's that. I feel intrinsically silly doing stuff like this. I don't know about you guys. I feel basically silly doing any kind of activity like this, but it's genuinely helpful. Yeah? Like push through the feeling of silliness. This is my recommendation to you, because you're cutting yourself off from all kinds of important help if you don't. Okay, so the point is, to do cognitive restructuring, you have to be able to separate out facts from opinions. You can't cognitively restructure away a fact. You can cognitively restructure an interpretation. All right, so what are some of these cognitive distortions that we're supposed to be dealing with? One of the basic ones are called attribution errors, sometimes called the fundamental attribution error or correspondence bias. So in the general population, there's a tendency for people to attribute negative events to the disposition of others and the circumstances of themselves. So you cut me off in traffic because you're a jerk. That's such an easy, spontaneous inference for me to make. If somebody does something to me in traffic, I'm like, what a jerk. And there's no, I don't go like, wow, maybe they had a really tough day. Maybe they didn't have their coffee this morning. Maybe they're just like really struggling with something in their personal lives or something like that. None of that goes through my head. Only, oh my God, what a jerk. Whereas when I cut somebody off in traffic, I forgive myself immediately. I start going through the motions of like, whoa, I mean, I had a hard day, I don't have much coffee. I got a lot on my mind right now, and I think that's representative of the average person. So the average person does something like this in a lot of different contexts where if you see somebody acting badly, you'll say that's a problem with their very core personality. Like it's a stable feature of that person's dispositions, the way that they're going to respond in a variety of circumstances. And if you act badly, you say, well, it was my circumstance. The sun was in my eyes, and this is... So this is really widely reproduced, although it does not reproduce in all subpopulations. So for example, depressed people do the exact opposite. Depressed people, if they do something stupid or something like bad, will immediately attribute it to their own stable dispositions. They'll say, I'm worthless. I screwed this up. It's because I'm a bad person in my very core. Whereas if somebody else screws up, they'll be like, well, I understand. I can see how they were having a difficult time. I can see the circumstances that brought that about. Yeah?
No, it's true. You could be depressed but not be in that state.
That's correct. None of this is always true. These are general trends. Yeah, that's exactly right. And to be honest, the meta-studies that try to reproduce this stuff have gotten mixed results. The point is not that we have, so I would take this stuff about what people generally do with a big grain of salt. The point is just to identify this as a style of error. So you can go too far in one direction or the other in a variety of circumstances. So either one becomes a cognitive distortion. If you're constantly attributing things to people's dispositions when there's room for interpreting them more charitably, that's a cognitive distortion. If you're doing the same thing to yourself, if you're constantly saying, it wasn't my fault, it was just the circumstances, that is similarly potentially a cognitive distortion. Yeah? And totally vice versa. If you're constantly telling yourself, well, I screwed it up because I'm useless, that's potentially a cognitive distortion, probably a cognitive distortion. And if you're constantly telling yourself, well, he's not a bad person, he's just had if you have a violent or abusive partner, and you're constantly pushing it off and saying, look, it's not that they're a bad person, it's just that they got laid off and now they're really mad about that. Well, sometimes it is the stable disposition of others, yeah? Okay, so knowing this and knowing that you can have a tendency to go wildly one way or the other can help you sort that out, yeah? Okay, yeah. So yeah, we did this already, so depressed people. So the suggestion from the CVT people is the difference between the average population and the population of depressed or anxious people. I'm talking mostly about depression and anxiety because those are the ones that I know most intimately. There's lots of other complex mental problems that you could have, but so they think that this reflects a difference in their core beliefs, right? So is your default position to assume that you're a good person or to assume that you're a human dumpster fire? And the way you attribute causation in your world is going to depend on that default assumption. Yeah? Similarly, again, the core beliefs can be very hard to change. They resist evidence, but they can be challenged. You can push back on them consciously. If you're aware that you've got these things, you can consciously push back against them and get a little bit of relief from them. Okay, here's another cognitive distortion. People often see the world in black and white terms, right? So they'll say things like this. This is, I mean, if this doesn't sound familiar to you, you feel grateful because lots and lots of people's internal monologue sounds like this. I'm either completely successful or a failure. Sorry, this is just black and white. I'm either completely successful or a failure. You either love me or you hate me. So this is a kind of false dichotomy, right? Remember the fallacy of false dichotomy where you're saying, look, it's either got to be this or that. And they put the two things at the very extremes of the situation. So, and like, why are people like this? I would suggest that it's more mental effort to see the world in shades of gray. Yeah? You got to keep more in your head all at once, and your brain is constantly striving to do the most efficient processing it possibly can. Again, think back to the Dennett's robots stuff and the fact that you're dealing with cognitive problems that vastly outstrip your resources, right? You got way bigger problems than you've got the ability to cope with, or not the ability to cope with, but the processing power to like clean out completely. So your brain is constantly trying to find the most efficient way of dealing with the situation. And if you're stressed, hungry, tired, freaking out for whatever reason, you got even less resources. So the worse of a mental place that you're in, the more prone you're going to be to doing this black and white thinking because it's quick and easy. It's quick and easy processing of the situation. So, okay, so here's what the slide I thought was going to come up. So if you've never heard these phrases coming out of your own head, be grateful. Lots of people listen to this all day long. So, I'm a failure at everything. Or, you never listen. Or, I've never been happy. Or, I always alienate people. Yeah? So these are universal statements, recall. They say, for all things such that X, they have the property Y, right? And recall that these are very easy to disprove. So if you say, I'm a failure at everything, if you think of one thing that you didn't fail at, and I guarantee there's at least one thing that you didn't fail at, I mean, you made it to university, so that's got to be true. Right? If you're by dint of being in this room, I can tell that there's at least one thing that you didn't fail at. So that disproves the thing, right? Unfortunately, so you might not be motivated to look for counter evidence like this, and it might not be very much comfort, because all that does is downgrade these to generic statements, right? So if you can find one counterexample, you can disconfirm the universal, but you're still stuck with the generic. I fail at a lot of things. You mostly don't listen. I am often unhappy. I often alienate people. So, like, all of those are still problems, right? All of those are still issues that might worry you and that you might be genuinely upset about. They're not as severe as the first set. So they're not as bad, and you might not react as strongly. They're still problems, though, right? Okay, so it's relatively easy to go from, you just need to think of one thing that disconfirms the universal to go to the generic. Hopefully you can go from the generic to the existential. So this is just saying that sometimes this stuff happens. So I've failed at some important things. Probably that's also true for everybody in the room. You sometimes don't listen. Probably that's true for basically any relationship that you have. I have periods of deep unhappiness. I have alienated people. Okay. So it's harder to get from the generic to the existential because now instead of just having to find one counterexample, you have to survey both the confirming and disconfirming evidence. It's a much harder cognitive task to do, right? You have to look through all of the, so I don't even know how you do this in a complete way. You have to think, of all of the things that I've tried to do, how many have I failed at and how many have I succeeded at? And especially if you're low on cognitive resources, and especially if you have a core belief that you're a bad person, this can be an extremely difficult thing to do, but nonetheless worth your while to try at least, right? Because, I mean, these things are still all problems. These are all still issues that you might genuinely be worried and upset about. But they're not the absolute catastrophes of the universal. Yeah? So this cognitive distortion, black and white thinking, the worse a shape you're in, the more likely you're going to go to the most extreme versions of this stuff. And unraveling this is a matter of looking for counter evidence. Yeah? So if you can identify it, so look for when you're thinking about your own thought, look for words like always, never, all, every. Those are hints that you might be engaged in black and white thinking, that you might be taking something to an extreme. And again, like it's the worse you feel, the harder this is to do. But and if you're feeling bad, the counter evidence will probably feel insignificant. So you might be able to identify a bunch of things that you say, like, I fail at everything. You might be able to identify a bunch of things that you didn't fail at. Well, I passed high school. Well, I got into university. Well, I made the soccer team. But those things will not feel as important or significant as the things that you did fail at, right? So your emotional response to the counter evidence will be probably asymmetrical to your emotional response to the evidence for the thing that you were, to this automatic thought that was jumping at you, yeah? So you kind of have to weight that, and you have to kind of include that in your calculations. You have to say, look, okay, I know that I'm not going to be as convinced by my counter evidence, but nonetheless I'm aware that it exists. Nonetheless, I can identify it, and I can at least rationally say to myself, this is counter evidence to my automatic thought. Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So a related cognitive distortion, sometimes called catastrophizing or catastrophic thinking, is related to the fallacies of faulty generalization and slippery slope. Right? So if you say, I failed the test, therefore I won't get into the major I want, and so I won't have a satisfying life and my career, and therefore my life is over. Right? This is probably an instance of the slippery slope fallacy, because one thing doesn't necessarily lead to the next, doesn't necessarily lead to the next. Yeah? I hurt my friends' feelings, so now they'll hate me, and they'll get all of my other friends to hate me, and I'll be alone forever. Right? So probably an instance of the slippery slope fallacy, and what they're doing is, and this is particularly characteristic of anxious cognitive styles, so if you have anxiety, you probably do something like this, where you go pretty much directly to the worst possible outcome of an event. There's a variety of, for any event, there's a huge variety of possible outcomes, and if you have an anxious cognitive style, so if you believe that your world is basically hostile and that you're basically not a good person, you're far more likely to say, well, this thing happened, therefore it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a catastrophe. So you catastrophize things. Yeah? So one of the things that they ask you to do in cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm really just giving you an advertisement for these techniques. You're not going to like know how to do these techniques just from taking this class. I really just want to like alert you to the existence of them and offer you the suggestion that maybe you might want to, if this appeals to you, then you can go to get trained in this stuff. But okay, so here's what they'll do. So if you're catastrophizing, here's what they recommend that you do. Think about a situation that causes you anxiety. I bet you can think of one. Now describe for yourself the worst case outcome, the best case outcome, and the most likely outcome. So if I'm giving a talk, I'm going to be anxious about it, right? The worst case scenario, I seize up, forget what I was going to say, pee myself, and run out of the room crying. I guess that's as far as I can tell, that's as badly as a talk could go, yeah? Best case scenario, I'm charming and witty, compelling. I convince everybody of my thesis, and they give me a job or something. I don't know. The most likely scenario is that people give me about 50% of their attention. Half the room likes it. Half the room didn't care much. 2 people hated it. And then life goes on, right? So And then, okay, so you got your anxious situation, you got your best, worst, and likely outcomes, and then you ask yourself what the long-term consequences of any of them will be. So does it matter, how much will the outcome matter tomorrow? How much will the outcome matter a month from now? How much will the outcome matter a year from now? I don't recommend you take it too much farther, because if you ask yourself, will it matter in a billion years, the answer is always no. But, you know, within reason, ask yourself what the consequences will be. And you can use this to separate out catastrophizing from reasonable anxiety, right? Because there are stakes in life. It's not like nothing matters and you can just like, doesn't matter how things go. Of course it matters. But you can use this to kind of reframe the stakes of the situation that you're in. And probably you're not gonna stop being anxious. Like probably your adrenal glands are still gonna be cranking out stress hormones. But at least you've got a more balanced framework for your thinking about it. Yeah? You guys good? I don't think I have a whole nother hour of stuff to do today. Do you feel all right? We don't just keep going? Or do you want to take it? Yeah, okay. Okay, good. All right, we'll keep plowing through this. So the other side of the sheet, and it's way too personal and awkward to actually do this in class, so I'm not going to ask you to do this right now, but let's just look at it, think about it. I do recommend that you try this. This is a worthwhile exercise. So the CVT Thought Record, this is a really standard technique that they ask you to do, and you print off like a dozen of these and put them in a notebook and carry it around with you. And when something distressing happens, here's what you do. This is just basically an argument analysis. You describe the situation that you're in, and then you write down the kind of emotion or feeling. And you do this typically with like a rating from 0 to 100. So I was like 60% sad, where like 0 is not sad at all, and 100 is the maximum degree of sadness. So it may be 60% sad, and 30% frustrated, and 70% angry, or something like that. And then you write down the negative automatic thought. That is the thought that was, this is the thought record, this is the kind of core of the thing that you're trying to address. You say like, I'm a loser, or something like that. And then evidence that supports the thought, evidence that doesn't support the thought, and then you use those two lines of evidence to come up with a more balanced thought, right? And with a more balanced thought, you then ask yourself, okay, now with that framework, how do I feel? So just an example for you. So here's a time when I was having really strong negative thoughts. In the summer last semester, I told a class of about 140 people that the exam would be at 10 a.m. on this morning when the room was booked for 11 a.m. I told 140 people the wrong time for their test. And I realized that at 3 a.m. the night before. I thought to myself, why didn't I make it at 11? That would have been more convenient. I did make it at 11. And I had to email everybody, and I had to like show up at 10 to apologize to everybody who showed up, and a bunch of people couldn't make it, and all this bad stuff happened. So between 3 a.m. and 11 a.m., I was having the following kind of thoughts. You're an idiot. What's wrong with you? What's, God. Okay, so that's the situation. The emotion I was feeling was really bad about myself. Like I thought, wow, I thought I was a smart guy. Turns out I'm not. The negative automatic thought was something like, I'm an idiot. Yeah. That was, as far as I recall, that was the basic negative automatic thought. Evidence to support that thought. I told 140 people the wrong time for the midterm. That was evidence, you know. And I do have a history of doing stuff like this. Like I have a history of making small but really important mistakes. So it's not that there's no evidence for this hypothesis. Like forgetting a reading week. Yes, for example, forgetting when reading week was. Right? Okay. Evidence that does not support the thought that I'm an idiot. Well, I guess I got a PhD in philosophy. You know, there's that. I'm reasonably successful in many of my life projects, not all of them, but like I have many life projects which are going on. I've kept my cats alive, you know. I've managed to stay married. You know, this is So that's the kind of evidence that you would marshal against the thought. And then an alternative thought would be like, I'm bad at being organized, something like that. Rather than just like, I'm generally an idiot. You say, look, I have a specific thing that I'm not that great at, getting dates and times right? And that's a thought that is still distressing. Like, I'm not thrilled with that. I'm embarrassed by it, and it like makes me feel not awesome. But it's nonetheless a more manageable thought, and it's a thought that I can do something with. Like, you can't do much with, I'm an idiot. It's not a helpful thought to have. It's not a productive thought because there's no way to get in on that. Like, there's nothing that you can do about that if you're just genuinely deep down not that bright. On the other hand, if you can identify some specific thing that you're not that good at, like being organized in the sense of like remembering when things are, that's a thought that you can do something with. I've since started using Google Calendar, for example. You can build structures around that. And I'm much less upset by the thought that I have organizational problems than the thought that I am generally an idiot. Yeah? Okay, so that's a kind of example of the sort of thing that you do with this. And if you're in CVT, they want you to do this. Whenever you have a really strong, emotionally laden thought, they want you to go through this process. Not necessarily because you're going to feel great at the end. Like, the point is not necessarily to, by this process, just feel awesome. It's more like to build up a pattern, right? You build up a picture of your thinking style, and also build up the skills of doing this critical analysis stuff on your own internal monologue. Okay? So I've put I put both of these up on Blackboard. I don't know how eager you're going to be to do the thoughts are not facts exercises again, but this is a good exercise. This is legitimately a helpful exercise. And remember everything that we said last time about distancing? So having it written on the page makes it easier to process and to get cognitive distance from the thought than just having it rattling around in your head, right? You're processing it from the first person perspective when it's in your head, and you can get a little bit of the third person perspective just by writing it down. Yeah? Okay. So yeah, we just went through all this. Okay, just a couple more cognitive distortions and a couple more quick techniques, and that'll be it for today. So another cognitive distortion was called hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill. This is the very helpful tendency of your brain to immediately get used to anything good in your life and to just go back to being neutral. So if something awesome happens, your brain's like, awesome, for a day, and then you're back to neutral. You're back to whatever your baseline level of happiness is. Probably this makes sense. Like with all of these things, it probably does make sense in evolutionary terms, because evolution doesn't care whether you're happy. It only cares whether you survive long enough to have kids or to support the kids of your close relatives. Yeah? It's true, it's true. You could become, okay, so maybe that's another reason why this is, so that this, isn't this helpful because you might become narcissistic. So I think that's actually a good point. Like if you just, also like if you were just totally satisfied with past accomplishments, you might not be motivated to do new things in the future, right? So you want to like keep improving yourself, you want to keep doing better and better in life. If you're just like, well, I got through high school, no problem. I'm just gonna cruise on that till I die. That's probably a suboptimal strategy. On the other hand, this tendency makes it really, really easy for you to take things for granted, right? It makes it really powerfully easy to ignore the things that are going well in your life because you've adapted to them and only think about stressful things and only think about the negative things. So here's a technique. I'm going to explicitly mark this under the advanced section, and I really don't recommend you try this if you're in a bad place. Okay, so this is really for people who feel that they're basically on sound footing and want to refresh your appreciation for life a little bit. Okay, it's a technique recommended by the ancient Stoics as a way of preparing for bad events. Their framing is more or less sort of you do this in order to be ready for bad things that are going to happen in your life so they don't throw you off your equilibrium. I'm going to add to that it's also really good for refreshing your gratitude. Think of this as gratitude practice, right? Refreshing the sense that what you have is actually pretty good. Okay, so here's premeditatio malorum, that is pre-thinking, thinking ahead about the bad stuff. So here's the technique. Think about something that you love. Person, a thing, your favorite cup, your partner or your parents, the use of your legs. Now, imagine it being suddenly taken away from you forever. So sit there imagining no longer being able to use your legs. And actually, so the Stoics recommend you start easy, so start by imagining your favorite cup got broken. Don't dive right in with like the death of a parent or something like that. That's a little too difficult to process, right? You don't want to go too hard on this. Really, I'm dead serious, don't go too hard on this. But maybe work your way up to that. So imagine your favorite cup has been taken away from you forever, you can't get it back, it's irretrievably lost to you. Now, spend a little time exploring how you would feel about that. Imagine it as vividly as you can, and imagine your way through it. Sort of like, okay, that thing is gone. Now I'm gonna have to live on without it. Something like that. Yeah? And that's probably gonna suck. So if all the Pollyanna, like feel-good stuff we've been doing so far has been grating on your nerves, here's one for you. Imagine something that you love has been taken away from you and then really sit in it for a while. Okay, and then return to the present where that thing is still in your life and try to reprocess it, right? So say, okay, this thing is currently in my life. Now how do I feel about it again? I do this fairly regularly on my wife. So when she would leave for work in the morning, I would tell myself, maybe that's the last time I'll ever see her. Sometime it will be the last time I ever see her. Fact is, everything that you love will one day be taken away from you. Sorry. So you can prepare yourself that by doing this. You can also, so when she got home at night and she hadn't been hit by a bus or left me or whatever, I was happy to see her. Yeah? I was grateful. I was grateful to see my wife one more day. And after you've lived with somebody for about 7 years, I can tell you that is a feat. That is hard to do, right? It's non-trivial because it's super duper easy to get totally adapted to the good things in your life and start taking them for granted. So this is a practice that you can use to combat that a little. Again, this is rough. Like, this is very difficult, and I don't recommend it if you're in a really bad place. But it can be helpful. I do this on the actually I do a lot of like, on any given day I'm probably using one or the other of the techniques that we've taught here. Yeah, like, and I consider myself a relatively healthy person. I think my life is going pretty well in general. Nonetheless, to stay healthy, I do this stuff daily. So, yeah. Okay, just to finish off, let's do one more. Excessive self-focus, another cognitive distortion. This is narcissus, so speaking of narcissism. One of the symptoms of anxiety and depression and also narcissistic personality disorder is an excessive focus on yourself. You can get really self-absorbed. And if you're anxious or depressed and you realize that you're self-absorbed, it'll make you feel worse. This will like hurt your feelings. Again, re-hurt your feelings. But you shouldn't feel that way about like giving yourself attention and care, right? You deserve your own attention and care. Every single one of you deserves your own attention and care. That's not the problem. The problem is you can go to excess with the attention that you're spending on yourself. So you can come to feel like you're the only person in the world with the kind of problems that you have. And that's really lonely. First of all, it's false, probably. Probably you're not the saddest person in history. A lot of people in history, chances are you're not the saddest. Your life hasn't been the most difficult. Like, just as a matter of statistics. Maybe one of you are. Somebody has to be the worst, the saddest person in history. Maybe it's you, but chances are it's not, right? And it's also very isolating to be to be fully inwardly turned is very, very isolating, and feeling connected to other humans is one of those things that almost no humans can do without. There's a couple of like monks, right? There's monks that can manage to be without human connection, but it's kind of a super spiritual superpower to do that, right? Okay, so excessive self-focus, bit of a problem. Here's a technique that you can use. This is from the Buddhist tradition. I learned this in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. Yeah? Those saints develop hallucinations. I'm sure some of them do. Yeah, I'm sure some of them do. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how hard it is to do. That's that's exactly how hard it is to like go without human connection. You might lose your grip on reality. Yeah. Same thing happens to people who have been in solitary confinement too long. Solitary confinement is regarded as a form of torture. And you can solitarily confine yourself in a crowd if you are too inwardly turned. It's really terrible. So here's a technique from the Buddhist tradition that's kind of meant to combat this. And again, oh my God, this feels so lame. To do this feels so lame. I had a lot of trouble reconciling this with my self-images. But I've done this for years, and it's so helpful that I cannot recommend enough pushing through the feelings of being a lame wad and just do this. So, or don't. I mean, I'm not your parent. So metta, loving kindness practice. Usually you've done this after you sort of meditated a little while to like calm down, you know, like settle things out, and you got a sort of sensitivity to what's going on in your body and mind. And you basically start by wishing yourself well, and then just watch what happens in your body and mind, right? You say phrases like, may I flourish, may I escape from suffering, may I increase in joy, may I accept the present, you know? And some people will find this to be a pleasant experience. They'll be like, yeah, I want myself to do well. I want to get out of feeling like I'm suffering. Some people will find this to be a horrible experience. Lots of people have a massive amount of trouble just wishing themselves well. The traditional instructions have you start with yourself because it's supposed to be the easiest. But for some reason, a lot of people in modern Western culture find wishing themselves well to be a profoundly difficult thing to do. So the exercise is not to force yourself to feel this way. It's to throw it out there as a suggestion and kind of see what happens. Just observe your own reaction to these intention, right? I mean, you should want yourself to do well, even if you don't care about yourself at all. If you think, I'm worthless, the only thing that matters is other people, well, you suffering is hurting them too, right? And you flourishing would help them too, right? So even if you don't think you're intrinsically worthwhile, you should nonetheless wish these things, I think, rationally speaking. Okay, so you do that for a while, and then you move on. You move on to somebody you care about. You say, may they flourish. And here, so the thing that's combating excessive self-focus here is that when you switch to other people, what you have to do is focus a little bit on the fact that they have a perspective every bit as complex as yours, right? So I would say there's like 30, 40 people in this room. That's 30, 40 perspectives that are as complex as yours. Their life histories as complex as yours and mine, right? They have problems that are as deep and complicated and challenging as yours. So just spending a little bit of time appreciating that is helping you to get out of the default mode of focusing on yourself. And then you do this thing again for them. So may they flourish. May they escape from suffering. May they increase in joy. May I accept the present that they're experiencing. So it's not you who hope they accept the present. You try to accept that actually there's very little that you can do to change their situation, but nonetheless I wish them well. And then you do that about somebody who you're neutral about, and then you do some of that about somebody who you're in conflict with. This is a hard one too, so pick an enemy and say, I hope they flourish. I don't know about you, typically my reaction on this stage is, so may so-and-so flourish, and some part of me goes, I don't hope they flourish, I hope they die in a fire. I hope they get a horrible skin disease and just all their friends leave them. But nonetheless, So the goal is don't ram the positivity down your own throat here. Just observe your reaction. And remember, so I try to keep in mind that a person who's suffering inevitably shares their suffering around. Somebody who's deep in suffering, somebody who's a jerk, is typically suffering a lot, and they're gonna just like be a whirlwind of suffering, spreading it to everybody around them. So if you have somebody like that in your life, it would be to your advantage for them to suffer less, to be less of a whirlwind of like narcissistic, nonsense or whatever. So you probably do want your enemies to suffer less. I mean, it would be strategically a good idea for you if you could help them suffer less. And typically people who are jerks are in a lot of pain, right? That's why they're jerks. And then, okay, so then person you're in conflict with, and then typically all sentient beings. So every bird and bee, every panda and elephant, and every human on the planet, and whatever aliens there are, wish them all well. Basically, go through this again. And the point of this, the aim here is to just spend time really ruminating on the fact that other perspectives exist for the first part and are as complex as yours for the second part, and that they matter as well. Yeah? Okay. Okay, that's it for today. Next time we'll talk about paradoxes, and we'll talk a little bit about the exam, I think, on Tuesday as well. All right, thanks everyone.